This is TWiT.
We have a really good guest this week, but it was an interview we recorded earlier. So we're going to play the recording back for you. Tulsee Doshi. I gotta work on saying that before she enters the stage. It has an incredible title. She's the senior director and product lead of the Gemini models at Google, of course, and these are Google's premier models. So she's got a very important task. She's been focused for a long time on equity in AI models, and I think that's an important thing. First thing I asked her when we had the interview, which was, when was that? It was a couple of weeks ago, I think. And you, Paris and Jeff were both there for that. First thing I asked her was, here's Mark Zuckerberg coming after your best engineers with a wallet full of money. How do you react to that? Does that scare you that Mark is going around with his big fat wallet?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's like, I think it's just a signal of how hot the space is right now.
Yeah.
You know? And like, I think in some ways, actually, there's something exciting about being in the middle of a space that is clearly that exciting. And like, it just puts the pressure more to like make something amazing, right? Because ultimately, the best people want to work on the best products with the best research and the best innovation. And so if you can crack that, you're also cracking like bringing the best talent. And I think it's like this very self-reinforcing cycle. So I'm like, okay, how do we build that self-reinforcing cycle?
I actually liked what Mark said in his interview with Jessica Lesson on the Information TV. He said, people don't come here for the money. They come here for the GPUs. They don't, and they don't want to manage people. They want the GPUs. One of the things that seems to be the case, and it happened with Grok, it looks like Meta's doing this too, is the more compute you throw at these models, the better they get. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I think, so when we think about the model training, we think about it in kind of three parts, right? So there's the pre-training part, which is where you leverage compute to build that kind of initial base model, right? Then you have the post-training part where you're kind of refining the model and actually like giving it that behavior, that better quality improvements, the real experience that a user is going to experience. And then you have kind of inference time that you do after. And what a lot of teams are seeing, including ourselves, is that you can crank up, for example, in inference time, the compute that a model sees when it is actually like trying these different techniques out. So for example, we have something we shipped or announced at I/O called Deep Think, where we're really scaling up the inference time of the model, and you can see the performance gains there. And so I think it's about being strategic about how do you invest in pre-training versus post-training versus inference time, and where do you want to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, because even Google doesn't have an infinite budget for this stuff. Do you use NVIDIA chips at all, or is it all TPUs? Or is that secret?
Can't think much to like how we break down.
Okay.
we are using a combination.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, you don't have to break it down. Okay, that's interesting. I should mention, by the way, that one of the things you did for the last 5 years is run responsible in AI at Google. So that's a really interesting title. And the fact that you're now the senior director and product lead for all Gemini models tells me Google's pretty committed to safe AI. I know you're a big proponent of inclusivity. Tell us a little bit about that story at DeepMind Google.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if you want to build technology that everyone uses, you want it to also be technology that you can trust, right? So if I'm going to actually use a model for my day-to-day tasks, if I'm going to ask it questions about my life, if I'm going to trust it as a coding partner, right? I want to know that I can trust it. And so for us, safety becomes just a critical part of every step of the journey. And I think that's actually been what's exciting for me is like every time we look at a model and we decide, hey, is this a model we want to ship? We're looking at safety metrics. We're looking at how it's performing, not just on quality, but also how it's performing on potentially harmful content and what it is able to generate. We have a frontier safety framework. And one of the things we look at every time we're building these models that are more and more capable is how does the model perform, for example, in the context of cybersecurity? And what are the potential vulnerabilities that it can both help with, but also what are the potential vulnerabilities and dangers it could create? And so for us, like a really important part of this process is consistently testing the model, consistently improving the model for these issues, We have an entire safety team, both from a product perspective as well as from an engine research perspective, that are continuously iterating on making sure that we're innovating on how the model can both be super helpful and super responsible. And I think when you find the sweet spot of those two things, that's where you get a model that actually people can use on a daily basis.
It was interesting, though, at I.O., I can't remember who said this. I don't think it was Sundar, but one of you said, hey, our secret sauce is we know a lot about you. And privacy becomes a big issue. People have to trust you, right? What do you do to protect people's privacy and still at the same time say, but our advantage is we know a lot about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news maybe from a Google standpoint is that privacy has been something we've been looking at for years across Google data, right? So actually leveraging user data effectively is not new to Google in terms of if you think about your experience, let's say on YouTube, right? And your personal recommendations, right? Or your experience with your Google Assistant or your experience with search. And so I think in many ways, the benefit is that when we're offering, for example, an experience in the Gemini app, we can build on the privacy infrastructure that we've had for decades, right? Rather than actually having to try to reinvent that wheel. And of course, a big part of that is giving users transparency and control over like where your data is used, being able to actually say, no, I don't want my data used versus I want my data used, being able to turn that off. I think being able to provide users control is super important. And I think being able to be consistent in our approach kind of across the Google ecosystem is super consistent as well.
That's interesting. I mean, how are you approaching this? And I guess how is your shift? This has been, I think, a very hot button issue across the AI industry, but also across tech generally over the last decade. How has your thinking on this shifted? And I don't know, has that surprised you at all?
When you say this, you mean just like safety, responsibility, privacy?
Yeah, safety and responsibility. I mean, I feel like these kind of hot button issues, it's a grab bag, but I feel like you kind of touched on some of the key issues right now.
Yeah, I think my in terms of how has my perception shifted? I mean, I think when I started working in responsible AI, 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, the world looked very different in terms of what AI meant, how users were using AI, the kinds of problems we were tackling when we were talking about responsibility versus the way that AI is being used now. And so I think the perception of responsibility has to shift just by like, what are the key things a user is actually doing with the model and with the product, right? I think now in the world of generative AI, the kinds of questions you ask about safety are different, right? So for example, when I was talking about cybersecurity earlier, and when we talk about frontier safety, the questions we're asking are like, what is the potential for a model to both address threats, right? So for example, I think Sundar shared this as a tweet maybe this past week, that we're actually like leveraging our models to help identify and find security threats, right? So these are areas where generative AI can actually help.
Yeah, you just found a 0 day, actually. Yeah,
exactly, right? So we can actually like help with responsibility. And I think that's like an angle we are excited about and thinking about, which is how can these models actually like help us from these responsibility situations, right?
Yeah, we know the bad guys are using it, so it's nice if the good guys can use it too.
Yeah, we should wield it in both directions of these things, right?
Yeah.
And then to your point on the like kind of what are the risks, right? Like how are we like tracking them and testing them? And so the space has just changed a lot, and maybe in some ways, I feel like we're in a moment in history right now where how we develop this technology is going to influence the future of what this technology can do. And I feel like the more that we're intentional about responsibility in the way that we're developing the models now, we're going to see that payoff a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, in how people are able to use the models.
Tulsee, I'm fascinated with I'm sorry, you weren't finished.
No, go please.
With your career arc. You're young, you're smart, you Phi Beta Kappa at Stanford, for God's sakes, the LinkedIn tells me. I'm just a journalism teacher at Stony Brook. And I'm curious about, it's just journalism, believe me. I'm curious about.
He gives everybody an A, don't worry about it.
Kind of your career track, for one. You're at a very high, very strategic position in an extremely hot field. So I'd like to hear your own perception of how you got there, but also your advice to students today who want to be involved in AI, who want to be leaders, and included in that is how technical they need to be given for the wide range of jobs in AI, given that the machine is now literate and now speaks our language. So if you could just talk about your careers and other careers, it'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I think in terms of my own career, I sometimes look back at the last 7 years, and it's kind of crazy how much I think sometimes also being in the right place at the right time can change your career trajectory, right? So when I started in responsible AI 7 years ago, responsible AI wasn't really a dominant phrase. It wasn't something we were talking about that much in the industry. They were just kind of sprinklings and startings of this conversation. And for me at the time, it was an area of just like interest and passion. And I had studied, AI at Stanford, and the area was growing. And I've been lucky to ride that wave at Google, right? Because the space has grown, both the AI obviously space has grown, the responsibility space has grown, and then just like the way that we want to build that at the company. And so for me, a big part of this has been, my own career has been, how do I find the opportunities that are both like intellectually interesting, but also where there is growth because you can actually shape the direction and the strategy of where a space is growing because it's still early. And so there's a lot of ability to kind of mold the direction of travel. And I think I was able to do that in responsible AI, and then I'm now able to do that in Gemini, both of which are exciting. I think for kind of more broad career advice, though, I think there's two things that are exciting about the world that we're in now. I think now we're in a world where everyone should know how to prompt and use models, right? I think that these models can do huge things for us. You talk about journalism. How can you actually leverage these models to help with research? How can you leverage these models to help synthesize your notes? How can you leverage these models to edit your drafts, right? There's so much that you can actually do with the models as they are now to help them work for you in whatever domain you're in. And so I think a big skill that I think needs to exist across the board is understanding how these models operate and understanding how to prompt them and how to use them, I think is actually a huge skill that we're going to see more and more people building up. And then in terms of like how technical you need to be, I think the ability to prompt a model itself doesn't have to be a deeply technical skill, right? I think that's a skill that should just exist kind of across the board. And then I think it more depends on what part of the model, what part of AI do you want to be a part of? Do you want to be at the part where you're more of a consumer of the model, where you're building experiences on top of it, using, for example, prompting? Or do you want to be all the way the other extreme, which is you're pre-training models and deepen the research and like deeply technical? And I think there's going to be roles and opportunities for people to have impact across that full spectrum, which I think is really exciting. I think the other thing that's exciting to me about careers now too is, again, if you look at some of the areas that we're trying to even make Gemini better in, right? One of the areas that we're looking into a lot is how do we make Gemini better for teachers and for students? And as a part of that, what we want to do is work with teachers and students, because we actually want to work with individuals who are experts in the fields that they're working on, and making sure that the model is great at responding in ways that are helpful to them. And so actually, I think what's exciting is there's more and more need for experts across industries that aren't just software engineering to make these models actually better at supporting those fields and industries.
You're working on multimodal models in particular right now, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Basically, what it means is we want the models to be able to both understand and communicate in any medium, right? So we want the models to understand images. We want them to understand video. We want them to understand audio. We also want them to be able to generate video and image and audio. And so you should be able to communicate with the model in the way that makes the most sense for you and for your use case.
Google's done some amazing stuff. I mean, VO3 is incredible.
I mean, VO is incredible, right? Like
he's obsessed with VO.
I am obsessed with VO. And Imogen, now, you can help us. Imogen?
Great question.
Never mind. I like VO. I know how to say that.
Is it split?
Let me ask actually the real question, because you talk about safety and responsible AI, but there are some, mostly graybeards, who are worried about superintelligence and AGI. And I like it that you're focused a little bit on more proximate problems, like representation. Are you at all worried about superintelligence casting humans out?
I mean, I think we are actively working on the path to AGI, right? I think that is a space.
Really? You think that's going to happen?
Do I think AGI is going to happen?
Yeah.
I do think we're on a path to AGI.
Wow. Okay.
I think
And what is your definition of AGI?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the critical question here is like, what is the definition?
What is it? Yeah.
AGI? And I think who you talk to will have different opinions on that, right? I think for me personally, a lot of when I think about AGI, I think about like, what are aspects of intelligence that like feel like when you talk about intelligence, I think there's the ability to complete a task or follow a set of instructions, et cetera. And then there's the ability to complete like truly complex tasks that are like very, very traditionally aligned with being a human, right? In terms of being able to drive that work. But I think that, that definition is still evolving. I think different individuals are working on the definition of AGI in different ways. But I think when you talk about safety and responsibility, a big part of frontier safety is preparing for more and more intelligent models. So when we talk about frontier safety, a lot of what we're talking about is, and in fact, if you look at the frontier safety framework, one of the things we do is we have sort of a threshold, if you will, of like, hey, at what point is the model reaching a threshold where things are starting to get potentially more risky, right? And we actually might need to like take more drastic measures. And so every time we evaluate a frontier model, we evaluate it for where it is on that scale. And it's not there yet. But the fact that we have evals to test for that means that we can keep ourselves in check for as we get closer and closer and closer to kind of frontier intelligence. What does that mean for frontier safety?
So one of the debates we have around here is reasoning.
Constantly.
we have lots of them. Reasoning. And I'm curious to have you define that as well, because I question whether what reasoning models really do, that yes, they slice apart a task. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's that process that is
like
evident.
The planning process, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I question whether it's reasoning. So I'm curious to hear your definition of reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about reasoning models, I think of models that like plan a task before they execute it, right? So if I ask a model to even just write a story, right? And if it's thinking, what it will first do is say, okay, Tulsee's asked me to write a story about blank. Let me first understand what she's asked for. Let me then like plan out the steps of how I'm going to write this story. And then let me actually then write the story.
We first saw that with DeepSeek. We're seeing it with other thinking models. Google does not show a lot of that thinking process to the public.
We do both in the Gemini.
Deep research does.
Deep research does? Okay.
Deep research does, but even actually the main, like just the vanilla thinking model. So if you're using, for example, 2.5 Pro and you use it, let's say in AI Studio or in the Gemini app, you'll see this section at the top that is.
It will show you.
You can expand, yeah.
You can expand it, and then it'll show you a summary of the model's thinking process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much of that is really... I've always wondered how much of that is just the prompt saying, you should pretend you're doing something, and how much of it is really genuine reasoning going on. Really,
I mean, I
guess what is going on under the hood of that process.
Do we even know is another question, right?
I mean, I think that the what we're showcasing when you, for example, look at those summaries is a summary of the actual tokens the model is producing.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So the model produces the way that, and when these thinking models are generating output, they produce a set of thinking tokens.
Yeah.
Or they produce the set of response tokens.
Interesting.
And so we take those thinking tokens and then we summarize those into kind of a more user readable, simplified summary that you can actually see in the app or on AI Studio. And actually those summaries are also available in the API. So for developers, they can actually like turn on those summaries for experiences they're building for their end users as well.
One of the things, I was talking with Anthony Nielsen, who's our AI guy locally in the company. He likes and I like them too, the smaller models we can run locally, like Gemma. And you've actually done a really good job with these smaller models. Is it because they're quantized? How are you getting them so small?
A few different ways we're getting them so small, but I think actually I would say like small models for us is actually super, super important.
Yeah, because you want to run them on a phone.
You want to be able to run them on a phone, right? And but also like, I think it's the, when you think about your Pixel phone, your Android phone, we want to make sure we can bring the best of AI to those devices. We want to bring the best of AI to your laptop, right? So on device becomes super critical. I think also in general, something that's super important to us is what we've been calling the Pareto frontier, which is the ratio of like cost to quality, right?
The 80-20 rule. Yeah.
and for us, it's just like super important to be on that Pareto frontier. It's not just about providing a really amazing model, but that's too expensive to use. It's about providing models at different sizes that work for different use cases, right? Like if you just want to do a simple summarization task, you maybe don't need
You don't need a 70 gigabyte model. No.
You don't need the big model, right? What you need is a small model that is super fast. And so, for example, we have Flash Lite, which is our like fast, really cheap model. And it's like the fastest model out there, right? And that allows you to get what you need quickly, cheaply, especially if you're doing, a set of kind of like basic batch tasks.
This is cool. When you studied philosophy of AI at Oxford, that was some years ago. Did you have any idea we would be where we are in 2025?
No, it's actually so funny now going back and looking at some of that content, because I think at the time, like so much of what AI was going to be felt hypothetical, right? At the time, even if you look at actually science fiction, like historically, so much has been written about, let's say, 2025 and what the world will look like in 2025. And on one hand, you look at many of those things and they are more futuristic in science fiction than where the world really is. And in other ways, you see folks already having thought through what are the implications of how humans and AI are going to work together? How do we actually make these models work in partnership with us? What does that look like? What does it mean to have AGI, or what does it mean to be human? And I think those are questions we're wrestling with now, just now with more tangibility, because we kind of see the models in front of us.
I'm curious about the application layer. You're at the model layer, so I know this is not directly what you're doing. We're all big fans of Notebook LM.
Amazing. I'm a big fan.
In fact, Stephen Johnson's going to be on the show.
And it's a phenomenal execution of AI's potential and the limitations. I don't know whether you've played with Perplexity's Comet yet. Their new browser.
Agentic browser. Yeah.
Their agentic browser.
Well, OpenAI is rumored to do one. There's the browser companies doing Dia.
And Google's adding more into the browser.
Yeah.
So to me, a lot of the interesting work, the models are certainly not commodified, but you're all leapfrogging each other at very high-end capabilities.
Yep.
And to consumers, what we're going to see far more and more is the application layer.
Correct.
Where do you see that going? You're getting more into, you created a great product like Notebook LM at Google, you're putting more into the browser. Where else are the opportunities that you see to build in the AI capabilities?
I mean, I think there's opportunities across the board, which is what's exciting. I think for us, actually, what's now exciting about where the models are in their capabilities is that we can be more creative at the application layer, because there is now so much potential to build, right? And I think it spans the gamut. So on one hand, you can think about how do you make existing Google products better experiences for users, right? So what does it mean for AI mode in search to be an incredible search experience? What does it mean to improve the way AI is leveraged in workspace, right? And in your Drive and your Docs? What can it look like? How do we take our existing Google experiences and enrich them even more to make them easier to use, more effective, smarter, more of a partner, right? I think if you look at the Gemini app, what we're really trying to build is this like personal, powerful assistant, right? Something that can actually work with you to solve your needs and to partner with you on your journey. And I think AI is making that more and more possible. And that's really where we want to go. And when you look at products like Notebook LM, I think they're actually really pushing at the newer capabilities of these models, like the ability for the model to reason about a large space of documents, but also to be able to generate audio that actually feels natural and conversational and can actually like participate with you in the right way. And it's actually exciting. We've been building more and more audio models. In fact, we released at I/O an API version of our dialogue model, which is native dialogue. And what you can see as these models get better is that like they sound very natural, right? And they can have emotion and they can have styles and tone. And you can think about how that can affect so many different industries in terms of both like assistive conversations and making it more natural for you to engage and get help and not have to just like type in 5 words, but actually like have a conversation to get assistance. But you can also think about that in the context of customer service. And you can also think about that in the context of a Notebook LM. And I think there's so much we can do to like now rethink experiences because of what the models can do.
What does MCP enable in your view?
I think it enables consistency, in my view, right? So what MCP, the reason why you see all of these labs kind of coming behind MCP is there is value in consistent frameworks, because for developers and even for us internally, it makes the story simpler. And how do you use these models to connect to tools across the web to actually build kind of amazing composite experiences, which I think is great.
And for context, for anybody listening, MCP is the Model Context Protocol, which is kind of this like open standard that connects AI assistants to like the systems where their data lives. Is that right?
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
As you get to more agentic and more systems talking to each other, and as you get systems challenging each other and all those kinds of models, one of the curiosities I've had is whether they end up creating their own languages. Because they're communicating in tokens. They can communicate in multiple tokenized languages, but do they create their own kind of shortcuts?
Don't anthropomorphize, Jeff. Don't anthropomorphize.
It's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer, to be honest, because I think maybe to your point about anthropomorphization, I think so far I've been thinking about a lot of this as like software communicating with other software, which has been true for history, right? Sure. We've built APIs to work together in clear ways for a long time, right? That's how our systems work today. And it's more about how can we take this new type of technology and enable these pieces to work together in seamless ways. And I think to me, it's kind of an extension of that reality. It's just now that we're capable now of doing much more interesting things with what this technology can do.
Is an API then dynamic? Is it constantly changing? Do they kind of change each other's and develop as they work together?
So at the moment, I think one of the things maybe you're pushing on, so there's two parts to this. One is like kind of this notion of self-improvement or actually like iterating on the models or the APIs and like being more dynamic. I think right now, like the API construct itself needs to be consistent for developers, right? Because I don't want these things to change under the hood for folks. But at the same time, we should start getting better at the model sort of saying, actually, this is an easier way for me to call this this outcome, right? And here's how I'm actually going to go about this. And this is where like the reasoning steps really help also even like debug and understand why certain code is being written or why certain actions are being taken.
We're talking to Tulsee Doshi. She is the senior director and product lead on the Gemini models, which is pretty amazing. Really, what a title. All about Gemini. What's on the roadmap ahead? What would you, I know there's probably a lot of secret stuff, but what would you like to see on the roadmap ahead?
Yeah, let me tell you kind of a few things that we're thinking about. These, I think, are hopefully somewhat things that you've seen us talk about as well, so they're not necessarily surprising.
No surprises, okay.
But there's a few things that are top of mind for me. One is, I think with the 2.5 series of models, we've just built an incredible series of models. Like they're from an intelligence standpoint, incredibly capable. And now a lot of what I'm thinking about is how do we continue to make them more usable? And what I mean by that is like there is definitely areas we're hearing now that more and more users are using these 2.5 models around feedback. So for example, from the code IDEs, we'll hear feedback around how the model generates code. We know the model is extremely strong at generating, for example, zero-shot web apps or like reasoning through code bases. How do we get the model to be even better at editing and working with you as you're iterating on code flows? How do we continue to improve the model's ability to kind of follow these like agentic coding journeys? And so I think there's even more we can do to help the model be usable in these journeys that we're working on. So I think that's one big goal. Another is personalization, right? I talked about the Gemini app as being like a personal assistant. How do we make sure that we do that in the right way, both from a responsibility standpoint and a capability standpoint, I think is super important. We want to just continue also to just push the capabilities of the model. I think one thing we're seeing as we talk more and more about building agents is how important tool use is and how important it is that these models are very strong at using tools effectively at the right time in the right ways. And so we want to continue to push on how we do that. And so those are a few areas that we're really thinking about, but it's really about how do you make the model continue to be smarter and richer in what it can do? How do you make it more usable? How do you make it more personal? And then maybe the last one I would say is multimodality continues to be a priority for us, right? So one of the things that Gemini is insanely good at, for example, is video understanding, right? So you can put in an hour-long video And actually, like, the model can actually break that up into chapters and comments and synthesis and help you understand and walk through the video. And I think it's those kinds of things that are incredible that we can actually build on more from the model perspective and also the application perspective.
It's nice because, of course, YouTube is a big part of the Google family. I know you worked at YouTube for a while on machine learning there. So it's nice that they can that it can understand the millions of videos that are uploaded every day to YouTube. A lot of people, there's a lot of discussion. Last week we were talking about the fact that OpenAI had really focused on the chat, like the chat bot was the thing. And you talked a little bit about tool usage. What's the priority? Where are the priorities for Gemini? Do you want it to be a chat bot? Do you want it to be tools like your new, circle to search, things like that? Where are you? What is most important to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from the model standpoint, so I think this goes back to the point of like model versus application, which is from the model standpoint, we want to build a model that is versatile enough to be used across these different methods of communication, right? So the model should be versatile enough to be able to be used in the context of chat. It should be also amazing in the context of like circle to search. It should also be amazing in the context of a code IDE, right? And so I think for us, we're sort of saying, hey, we want to build a model that has the raw capabilities that can be molded into each of these different working environments.
So it can do all of that. Is that the tuning at the end of the pipeline that makes the difference, or?
Yeah, so I think a couple things make a difference, right? So you can think about it as like when we develop Gemini, let's say Gemini 2.5 Pro, it has a few kind of basic characteristics that we think about, right? So when we think about, for example, its tone or its style or its kind of performance, we sort of measure it on just the raw model. And then you can think about, well, okay, what is the right, for example, system instruction in the context of the Gemini app? Where might we want it to have a slightly different behavior because it needs to be more conversational, right? Versus maybe in the context of a watch, for example, you want the response to be much more concise because you don't want to have that like long readability on the watch. And so we want to be able to make sure that like the model itself has the ability to follow a variety of instructions such that you can prompt the model to be longer or shorter or take on a slightly different structure depending on the end application use case that it is operating in. And that ideally gives the model versatility to support a wide range.
Ask Gemini.
I'll be right back. But to support kind of a wide range of use cases. And then I think that's where the power comes in too, right? Because then the model, you can actually use the model across your day, across your use cases in a wide range.
Yeah. You, of course, one of your primary interests is in inclusiveness. One of the big complaints people have had about AI, particularly in things like face recognition, is bias in the AI. And now, of course, there's, thanks to Elon, there's issues about political bias in the AI. How do you make AI fair?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think I'd say two things, right? One is I actually think what's cool about when you think about inclusiveness kind of more generally is that I think if you look at this wave of generative AI, we're actually leveraging AI to democratize information for more and more people. So we're actually I think this is to me an area where AI can actually have a ton of positive value, right? So for example, my family speaks a language called Gujarati. The web historically has had very little Gujarati content, right? And so now if you can think about the fact that these models are actually exceptional at Gujarati, right? What does that mean for being able to create content, to translate content, to bring content to more people? Who maybe don't speak English or don't read English in the same way with the same kind of level of fidelity. And so I actually think there's a ton of value in terms of being able to create more equity, if you think about it, kind of across the world in terms of democratizing information, which I think is awesome.
Sure. But does it mean that you have to train the model in Gujarati? I mean, you have to go out and find that data, right, to train it on.
You have to find
more
examples
diverse
of inequities you have to be seeking out these inequities in order to solve for them, which seems pretty standard.
Train on people of color, train on women, train on different languages, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you definitely have to be robust in your data, right? I think ultimately, a big part of, so I think that the thing is when you talk about bias in AI, when you look at like the model development lifecycle, and this has been true actually for products, period. Like I think one of my favorite examples to give has been, which I actually didn't know until I started working on responsibility, was the Band-Aid, right? So I actually didn't realize that the Band-Aid is like a light pink color because that was supposed to match your skin tone. I just always assumed that the Band-Aid was a light pink color, and that's just like how it was defined, right? And it was only years later where I was like, oh, it's actually supposed to match a skin tone. It's just that skin tone is not mine, right? And so when you think about like bias in development, bias kind of enters at every form of product development. It enters at like how you make your decisions on what metrics you're going to look at. It enters in when you think about how you're training the model. It enters in when you're evaluating the model. It enters in with which users do you give the model to and what feedback do you get. You kind of have to look at every part of that process. And so for us, I think a big part of thinking about bias is really making sure that we're making thoughtful decisions every step of the way, right? That when we're thinking about data collection, that we're thinking about it, for example, across languages, right? That when we're thinking about evaluating the model, we're evaluating across a diversity of tasks and use cases and user needs. And that the more you make sure that you build that into every part of the pipeline, the more you end up with an outcome that just works for more people.
I know we're out of time, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we are really enjoying the latest Gemini models. Really very impressive. Do you pay attention to benchmarks? Do AI benchmarks matter at all in your world? They do.
I think they matter in the sense that they give you certain signals about a model, right? And look, certain benchmarks might matter more than less, and certain benchmarks will tell you different things, right? So for example, certain benchmarks will give you more of a sense of like user preference. And they'll give you more of a sense of like how different users actually like the model and use the model, which also which tells you a little bit about maybe their vibes, right? Other benchmarks will tell you about how good the model is at math, right? Or how good the model is at chemistry. And I think it's actually like for us, a big important thing when we're looking at the model is well-roundedness. So we always look at a set of benchmarks that look at kind of just the core reasoning capabilities of the model, right? So I know like, recently a lot of, all of our companies have been talking about, for example, humanity's last exam, right? And reasoning capabilities of the model.
That's right, yeah.
So you can look at kind of benchmarks like that. You can then also, from our case, we're lucky to have real users using our model. So we can look at live experiment results and actually like feedback from users, right? Which is super helpful. And then you can look at benchmarks that are more like leaderboards that look at
like LM Arena.
Like LM Arena.
That's when I became aware of Gemini, which I had played with, but I was really excited about because you shot to the top of LM Arena when you first came out. And that was, so I hate to say it, but that carries some weight. It may be a silly thing to optimize for, but it does carry some weight.
Well, I think what's important for us too is like it's the combination of these things, right?
Right.
So it's not just important to be number one in one of these and not in another. It's important holistically because what that actually is a signal to us is well-roundedness. It's a signal to us that we're not only building a model that is very smart, but we're building a model that is actually fun to use, right? And I think ideally, if you're building an experience that is amazing for users, you're building a combination of these two things.
Well, congratulations, because you're at the top of almost all the charts in LM Arena. So well done. And we love using, even though I don't know how to pronounce Imogen, and we love VO. And I am very
all of these things too. So
all of those, yes. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Tulsee. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for using Gemini.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Tulsee Doshi, Senior Director and Product Lead of Gemini Models at Google. And I'm very proud of myself. Not once did I say Gemini in front of her. I could have. I might have.
You could have.
But I didn't. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this highlight from Intelligent Machines. We do the show every Wednesday. You can watch us do it live. Or, as they say, like and subscribe. There's a link down below. Thanks.